Welcome once again to our daily preview. Steve Ovett and myself, Rob Walker. I can hardly believe we're talking about the penultimate day of action, but what a way to kickstart. It's beyond a marathon. They'll be going for nearly 4 hours, the men's 50k walk. And in the absence of the legendary Frenchman Johan Diniz, I just wonder whether it might be the day for the Slovakian Matej Toth. He's been around at the top of race walking for such a long time, but he's yet to have his day in the sunshine as far as the major championships are concerned. Also keep one eye on Andreas Chocho, the Ecuadorian, only 11th in Daegu 4 years ago, but he had a fantastic victory at the Pan American Games in Toronto last month, and I just wonder whether he might fancy the conditions. Also a very, very useful Japanese trio, Arai, Tanai and Yamazaki, and of course the Australian Jared Talent, who's been a brilliant ambassador for Australian race walking and for Australian sport as a whole. So often produces his best just when it counts. Right, Steve Ovett, we've got a field event coming up on Saturday evening. The big boys are out for the discus.
Well, they certainly are, Rob. It's going to be a strange event because in the qualifying, only 2 men actually got the qualifying discus. Dacres of Jamaica threw a big throw in the first round. The young Jamaican, just in his first senior competition, did really well. Malinowski, though, the world leader, second in the World Championships last time round, took all sorts of time to qualify. Bad throw in the first round, second throw well below the qualifying distance, and then he launched a really massive throw in the third round. He's the big favourite. But don't forget there's others in it. Not Robert Hartig this time, but Christopher Hartig, keeping the family tradition going. And also in the race, it also is Kanter of Estonia. So it's an open competition. They weren't throwing that well, anybody in that particular competition.
Well, Kanter's been around for such a long time, and I wonder if Christoph Harting would rip his shirt off, as his brother has a habit of doing. Now, one of the other events, of course, you know a huge amount about, and you're very much looking forward to, is the women's 800 metres. Eunice Sum came into this World Championship unbeaten this year, but the standard across those 3 semi-finals, well, it was fantastic, wasn't it?
It certainly was. I think about 5 women broke their personal best by over 2 seconds. They recorded 5 of the world's fastest 10 times this year in the qualifying. Well, who would have thought that Melissa Bishop, the Canadian, would break the national record by 2 seconds? Just followed on behind her by Lupo. And as Rob said, Eunice Sum, who was the world leader this year, struggled to qualify. She was one of the slowest of the qualifiers to get through to the final. It's an open race. All of those women can get close to 1:58, and if they do, they'll come down the straight together. It'll be a fascinating race.
Right. Well, another one we've got to talk about is the men's 5,000 metres. Mo Farah, champion in Daegu, champion in London, champion in Moscow, and of course he's already halfway towards the double after a memorable victory over Jeffrey Kipsang Kamworor in a classic 10,000 metres here. But Steve, there are some really, really good Kenyans he's up against. Caleb Ndika is the Commonwealth champion, not short of a drop of confidence or personality. Edwin Soy got a bronze medal here back in 2008. And of course we've got the Ethiopians, the 17-year-old Komif Kajelcha, fastest man in the world this year. And Gebri Hiwot, who has beaten Farah in the past. Do you think there might be any fatigue in Farah's legs after that brutal 10,000 metres back at the beginning of the championship?
Yes, I think there's got to be something in his legs. But you've got the likes of Kajelcha this time, who's a really fast finisher. He didn't really have that pressure put on him, I don't think, over the last 100 metres or so in the 10,000. This time round, I think the group of men around him are going to give him a real threat over the 400 if it's a slow race. I got the feeling that these guys will also take into consideration that if he is tired, they're going to try and pump it up early in the race. And if they do that, the fatigue in his legs could be a factor. But he's a great competitor, Rob, isn't he? Let's face it, one of the greatest distance runners of all time at the moment. So you've got to take into consideration that he wants to win this desperately to keep that momentum going.
Well, it's going to be a fantastic race. You've touched on the men's discus. The other field event for Saturday night is the women's high jump. And it's one, okay, not for the old girls, but for the experienced heads. Ruth Beitia, at the tender age of 36, I'm sure she won't mind me mentioning her age, is still going strong, the Spaniard. European champion, still regularly over 2 metres. But guess who else is back to form? Anna Chichirova, the Russian, 2:03 earlier this season. And another woman who it's great to see coming back to full fitness. She's been dogged by injuries since becoming the world champion and taking a silver here in 2008 is the irrepressible Blanka Vlasic. Watch out for a little bit of wiggling from Vlasic on the mat if she gets a couple of clearances. I'm sorry about that impression. She does it far better than me. So that women's high jump could be a real cracker. Now then, the he-men, the decathlon. Steve Ovett has a tradition of saying that the decathlon is 9 dodgy efforts and one great event, the 1500 to finish. We should talk about Ashton Eaton. I mean, there's a lot of action to come on their second day. Championship best in the 100 for the Olympic champion, the world champion. As an all-round package, Eaton is phenomenal. I mean, in the off seasons, when there's no major championship for him to go for, he's been flirting with the 4 hurdles and mixing it in diamond races. Yeah. He's a very, very special athlete.
Yeah, he's a very talented athlete. And I think the problem with the decathlete is that you don't get many competitions in between the World Championships and the Olympics. So a guy like Ashton Eaton can actually drop down and be up there with the best in the world at some of the other distances. Long jump, obviously, 100 metres, and he's dabbled, as you say, in the 400 hurdles even, and come 3rd or 4th in some of the diamond leagues. He is that sort of calibre of athlete. Very difficult to beat if you're up against that guy in any of the disciplines. If he has one problem, he sometimes has a mistake in the pole vault. But I think this time round, no problems at all. So I think he's a major factor to regain the World Championship title here again.
OK, and just finally, as it is the penultimate day of the championship, we can start turning our attention to the relays. Now, with the men's relay, well, history is on the side of the Jamaicans. The last 3 world titles, the last 2 Olympic crowns, but the team they've got is fantastic. Gatlin, yes, OK, double silver behind Bolt, but he's been on fire this season. Bromell, the youngster who was joint bronze in the 100 metres. Tyson Gay's in good form. Mike Rogers has knocked out, I think, 10 sub-10 second runs. That was before coming to this championship. Maybe this is the year, if there's going to be a year, for the Americans to get back on top.
Well, the biggest problem, as you know, with the American team is the baton. They've got some of the greatest runners of all time, but they sometimes don't get the baton around. Whereas the Jamaicans are a close-knit team. They must train together an awful lot more than the Americans. I think that's a big factor in the relay. So don't rule out the Jamaicans, especially when you've got Usain Bolt on the last leg. Come on. That guy can pull back maybe 2 or 3 metres on anybody, even Justin Gatlin at the moment. So fantastic.
OK, women's relay, again, Americans against the Jamaicans. But if we look at the history of how they've gone in recent years, rather than with the men, it's been totally dominated by the Jamaicans in the last 3 or 4 seasons. With the women, the Americans have won 1 year, then the Jamaicans. The way it's gone, can you see any advantage to the Jamaicans this year with the form of the likes of Shelley-Ann Fraser-Price?
And Victoria Campbell-Brown. Yeah, I mean, those are the two. The teams haven't been selected yet. They wait until the last minute before they select their teams to step out onto the track. Let's not forget that the Jamaicans are the world champions. The Americans are the Olympic champions. The Jamaicans won the World Relay Championships early in the year. The American teams have won most of the Diamond Leagues. It's been nip and tuck between those two, really has. So you can't say who's the better of those two, I don't think. But the main problem again is if they can get the baton around, and if they don't, there's other teams like Nigeria, America, the Bahamas, knocking on those doors to get into the medals.
Well, they're going to be 2 cracking relays to finish off. And if you want a little outside bet, watch out for the Canadian men. They sometimes end up getting disqualified, as happened to them on home soil in the Pan American Games, but they've got a really, really classy, very experienced quartet. And if there's any kind of mess up with the Americans or the Jamaicans, the Canadian men could be in the mix. And watch out as well for the British women, the likes of Dina Asher-Smith, who's gone under 11 seconds for the first time this year, a fantastic young athlete. The Brits are riding high off good performances in the Commonwealth Games and Europeans last year, so maybe they could get in amongst the mix if, as we've said, there are problems with the Americans or the Jamaicans in the women's. Penultimate day, 8 golds. Don't take your eye off the action for 1 single second, and neither will we.